What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Fudge Muppet. Today, we're going to be talking about Starfield again because, over a week ago now, we put out our video on Starfield's mixed feelings, like our mixed feelings towards Starfield.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we're going to revisit all of the Starfield information, and
we're going to undergo a thought exercise where we essentially shill ourselves into thinking Starfield is going to be sick.
we're gonna try and come at it with the most positive bias possible. So in every single thing, we're gonna look at it and oh, this thing element looks good. Let's pretend it and imagine it's gonna be 100% perfect execution. You know, this is Bethesda we're talking about, execution sometimes,
And like we said last time, we kind of have a sense of intuition just from spending so much time, not just playing these games, but kind of filming in these worlds and seeing things from different angles where we can see things and be like, this shot looks extremely selective that most people won't think about. However, we're going to be putting that aside.
Yeah. Well, we also just want to throw out there, we established that the sort of NASA punk sort of visual setting, aesthetic, the actual setting is not particularly our flavor naturally. It's not something we're, inclined towards. So we're going to leave that aside because for us, it's not really the thing. But let's actually look at the sort of underpinning underneath all of the gameplay elements and the role-playing stuff.
Well, I think one of the biggest things to address is actually the whole 1,000 planets thing, right? Because obviously having 1,000 planets means that there's going to be heaps of procedural generation and the potential, especially alongside all the settlement building mechanics, for there to be, a bunch of boring, barren planets and it's just a big scrapathon, buildathon thing. Basically get all the critiques of Fallout 4 and apply them on scale to a giant sci-fi game. Right? In terms of instead of there being a place with characters and quests, it's a place for me to build a settlement and maybe do a Radiant quest, right? However, the argument to that, if we're being positive about Starfield, is if there is just a bunch of, handcrafted, really good planets that they put a lot of attention into, it doesn't really matter how many other planets there are, right? If you think about, there can be 900, even more. So say there is 1,000 planets precisely. There can be 985 ones that are kind of just, boring. But if there's 15 good planets, then I'm going to be happy. So long as they're filled with, tons of role-playing opportunities, unique items, unique characters to meet, and unique quests, then I'm going to be happy.
Yeah.
It's just that the setup kind of, it kind of angles itself towards what we're concerned about. But if we're ignoring that,
it's going to feel weird. Even if you did, though, the one thing to consider is that even though, and I agree, it's if we got, for example, in terms of total world space, the same as Skyrim or twice that or whatever, but handcrafted and it's really great, that is fantastic. But the thing is, just the presence of all of those other procedural generated things and all of that, if there is a lot of barren land, it's probably going to feel different because it's actually, you feel the proportions.
One thing I will say about procedural generation, though, is that they have used this in previous single-player Elder Scrolls games before. I mean, you look at some of the forests in Oblivion and stuff, because a lot of people hear procedural generation and they think that it's just random for every player. I go to that planet over there and it's just random and completely different to your experience. That's not necessarily the case. When they're building the game, and AI has gotten a lot better over time too, they're build me a planet and it kind of just randomly picks from a bunch of different things. Like we said in our critique video where I'm some of these the quickly shown compilation planets look like they've gone floor color, rock type, tree type, sky atmosphere type, done. But if you go through and kind of comb through each planet and make sure it's good and modify bits and pieces, because they will do that. The problem is that there's 1,000 planets, or around that to do that to. That's the problem. But as a tool itself, it's not necessarily the worst thing, especially if those other planets we talked about are really well done and are handcrafted and cool.
Yeah, well,
I suppose. Sorry, just to hop in. One more thing I'll say. I suppose one thing that I hope at least is that if these kind of random planets are, largely or completely procedurally generated. I would hope there's kind of like some exceptions to the rules with locations. Like say you arrive at a planet, it's completely like kind of random. There's not a whole lot on it. It's mostly for like mineral resource kind of stuff. It would be cool if at least there was one cave or mine that's actually set in stone on this planet for every single player, so that Bethesda doesn't have to like kind of handcraft 1,000 planets entirely themselves. However, there's still a situation where you can say to your friend, oh, did you go to this planet? Because in the cave, which is exactly the same for them, and you know it's put there, the cave is kind of handcrafted to an extent. There's this unique, you know, laser rifle essentially that shoots blue.
Yeah.
Like, you know, whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that.
Absolutely. So just sort of like, hopefully there's some planets with more like hub areas that are sort of set in stone, and then around it, or if there's certain like dungeons and so on, whatnot. But another I think we should though talk about is, let's try and flip on the head and actually look at the positives of procedural generation. And if you actually look back to like, you know, Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, there is a lot of radiant sort of type systems and big just expansiveness. And that really is, I guess, in some ways is the benefit of procedural generation is the limitless possibilities. So if you find this planet and you're like, oh, it's really cool and it's right by the beach and it's got this cool thing and I can set up a settlement here, from a sort of like role-playing RPG perspective, there is a really cool element to it where, you know, I could take some sort of cowboy character and set up a ranch on some cool kind of planet, like in ranch in terms of vibe. Like, I don't know if you have like animals that you can keep and farm or whatever yet.
Space ranch.
But it would be really cool to have that sort of experience, or you can have like some like thiefy, criminally assassin kind of character with a little hideout somewhere nestled behind some mountain on some like frozen harsh planet that no one would think to go. Like, there's a lot of the settlement building and the freedom to go to these places and sort of just set up wherever really does feed into a role-playing angle, which we do like.
I guess the only thing that concerns me a little with that as well is kind of just you look at the resource aspect of the game, right? And to like kind of like travel around fast, you know, kind of like do the hyper jump stuff through space, it seems like you need to use, you know, resources and stuff and things of that nature. So I suppose if you're trying to get around the galaxy really quick, it probably is going to be a situation of when, not if, you get really into resource kind of collecting. I feel like for most players, you'll at least have to, you know, you might not want to become some like resource scrapathon maxi kind of thing, but I feel like you're going to have to get decently invested just to like explore the map a bunch, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which, look, it's not the worst thing. I think a lot of the time with settlement building, it becomes boring in the later stages if you're not into it. Like, I wasn't into settlement building in Fallout 4, but I still was kind of like having fun, kind of setting up my first one. Like, okay, like, you know, I'm doing this and that. If you can set up a smaller kind of base and things, and that can kind of get you enough resources to hop around. The only thing is then you'd want to spread them on different planets so you can like fuel up here and do different things. So then you can like fly to there and like,
yeah,
so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, we should probably start talking about some of the other role-playing aspects and stuff which we like, all the traits and sort of like kind of like background class elements and so on we're talking about. But one thing I just want to kind of establish for the Starfield is with talking about the settlements being able to set up wherever you want to go and all of the different kind of options and role-playing potential there, it's the same deal as with the characters, character traits and backgrounds and so on. And there's obviously like customization of weapons and all of that. Customization options are generally a good thing for role-playing. It's really good for your character, your weapons, the aesthetic look. It really, and you know, we love role-playing builds and coming up with sort of like niche little like, oh, you know, be this kind of character or that kind of character. The thing to consider, these are all really good, but in a game like, for example, like Elder Scrolls, you have a really rich established setting that you're interested in. You want to be in those worlds and use those role-playing tools, even though, like, you know, recently we haven't had as many of those tools. It's good to see those tools coming back, and I'm really excited about it, but I think a lot of it is going to hinge on whether the setting proves to be, like, compelling and interesting. For sure.
Because if you look at it kind of just, you know, on a surface level, from what we know so far, Bethesda has made a lot of kind of, you know, of the right choices. You know, for example, there's a lot of things, you know, it's easy to take for granted because it's like, yeah, it should be like that. Like, you stuffed it up when you didn't do that. But, like, no voice protagonist, They even the fact that there's traits, that there's background choices. Now, look, a lot of these things, and this was obviously our concern, they may be kind of shallow, right? But you compare that to the Elder Scrolls that doesn't have them at all. There are no traits. There are no, without the alternate start mod. There's no who were you before. I suppose the difference is, like you said, though, in the Elder Scrolls, you kind of can roleplay more because there's a million things you could be that's all backed up by kind of like the world that you're seeing around you. Whereas if you're just in kind of like a NASA punk sci-fi game, what are you going to say you were? I was an engineer or a chef, or like these kind of like Outer Worlds tier.
Yeah.
Not as in, you can't be like, I was a religious, zealous cultist who followed this, the Khajiit's version of Boethia back in Elsewhere and traveled across the map and so, all this kind of stuff. What I do hope, I'm not sure if it will be the case, but I hope there is a lot more dialogue related to your past, or at least like a few opportunities, because if you look at the kind of layout of the system they had when you were choosing, yes, that guy says to you something based on, what you pick. The same way Hadvar says some one-liner about what race you choose in Skyrim, right? But you'll notice some of the things this will provide you with a dialogue, kind of. Or like you'll have parents who you can speak to and things like that. But they don't all say stuff like, like that necessarily.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how extensive it is, but again, that's like, it is the step in the right direction in the way that, once again, it kind of gives you that freedom. You can just be your own character with a no voice protagonist from a role playing perspective. That's really, 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 really good.
I suppose though, when you look at skills that kind of everyone can get, though, it does feel a little bit like, if you were picking classes in an Elder Scrolls game, which we're a fan of that kind of stuff, but there's no attributes necessarily, so it's kind of like, oh, you pick knight, you get +10 to one-handed to start out, and it's like, that's cool, but at the end of the day, anyone can still get that. And it's kind of the same thing where it's like, okay, you'll start the game combat medic or whatever it was, 10% more pistol damage. I appreciate that, and I don't want to be like too snobby to be like, oh, why didn't you make it more unique? Because it's like, it's still better. You know what I'm saying? It's it's a step up from what there's been.
To be fair, we've still got to see the extensiveness of all of the skill systems and the actual like build components and all of the traits and things and possible things you can do and how that interacts with the gear. And sort of also the thing is like what kind of roles you can actually play in the world. Like it sort of feels like sometimes is that, like you were saying with the resources, it's not a sort of if, but more a bit when you start getting into collecting resources and so on. Because it might be like, oh, that's the most advantageous way to play. But it's like,
100%,
if I
can already see it is.
Yeah.
It will be, for sure.
But it's like, if I want to be a traveling sort of like, frontiersman, sort of lone wanderer, gunslinger kind of character, I hope there is ways to viably support that and stuff in the role playing or alternative paths, and it's
outside of just joining the one faction that kind of aligns with that theme.
Versus some games where they sort of, there's like the way to do it, and then there's some extra things tacked on. So I know like you can pickpocket in this, but like, can you really be a thief in space in this NASA punk setting kind of thing? Like, I just hope you can.
Well, I mean, that was actually a kind of, a kind of criticism in Fallout 4, at least, or any, like, Fallout games aren't really, like, thiefy games. Like, you'd get lock picks, so you could kind of, like, break into old boxes when you're exploring and things like that. But it's not like Skyrim, where there's an entire plot line to support being a thief, like, welcome to the Thieves Guild. And you breaking into all these different citizens' houses and things like that. Like, you could do that in Fallout 4, but it didn't feel particularly, like, interesting. I suppose the difference, right, is that in Fallout, there was, like, Diamond City. Yeah. And I know there were other places, but generally speaking, it was, like, this big main hub kind of area, right? And in Fallout 3, there was Megaton. And yes, Rivet City and so on, but like there's kind of like these big hubs of civilization, whereas in Starfield, if there are quite a few of these, say 5 or 6, then already you have a game that's feeling more like Skyrim in terms of cities,
because
and bigger too. Like, everyone knows that Elder Scrolls cities haven't been to scale because of different technological
usually
issues.
Like, people have seen us make thousands of Skyrim builds and so on. And there are systems that you have to basically role play yourself and enforce your own decisions and limitations and stuff on your character to act or behave certain ways or do quests or whatnot, or wear certain clothes, armor, and so on. And generally in games, there's sort of like two ways of role playing, where there are sort of gameplay facilitated like professions of role playing. So I could go be an assassin, a mage, or a warrior, or I could be like a merchant or stuff like that. And then there's the ones that are sort of more role playing, philosophical kind of things. So say if you're playing Fallout 4, it probably feels a little bit more like that, where it's like I can join the Institute or the Brotherhood of Steel or the Railroad or whatnot, but you're always functionally still just shooting things and killing it. Like the playstyle feels similar with variations on the combat. Now, if this game is going like, I think it really should, and I hope it does, lean into the sort of gameplay supported ones, because I'm not sure from the feel of it. Like, we're trying to be positive on it, but from the setting itself, it doesn't feel like there's heaps of like philosophical variety or like factions or like. I guess it's hard to have like depth in a setting that's only new and we only know so little about it. Like there might be a lot of uncovered depth underneath.
I mean, there's the religious traits and things like that, but it doesn't sound like, you know.
I hope that is
crazy.
A possibility. And look, seeing that, even we're being positive about it. Like that looks cool. Like if I can go and play some kind of crazy cultist, like that's cool, and it's something that I hope those kinds of things are all throughout it, and I hope. They really got to see how the factions play out, because at the moment it seems like bad guy Crimson Fleet, sort of the frontier sort of
there's different flavors of good guys.
Yeah,
and then the Crimson Fleet.
I hope because you can have what seems like a rather one-dimensional faction that within has different characters and vying for different ways. Like you can kind of
like look at the NCR in New Vegas. When you really get to know the NCR, they feel quite corrupt and like, oh, I guess we're like. You know, if you're playing an NCR character, your philosophy kind of ends up being, guess I'm the good guys, but like it's definitely not like, we're better than Caesar's Legion, but we're still kind of bad guys. And you can make philosophical arguments in New Vegas for picking house. You know, you want to do yes man, like there's all these different things and ways you can approach it. Whereas I don't want there to be a situation like Fallout 4. But it was kind of pretend it was there from the start with Nuka World, and it's kind of like, okay, you can join the Raiders, the bad guys, but like, it's like it would be interesting just if there was some more flavors, or at least ways that you can take the faction.
That's
and,
the thing.
So far there's been no indication that we can't do that, so we can't pretend like that's not an option because we don't know that you can't do that. Perhaps you can.
Yeah, because when like people like design games, it doesn't really matter about the amount of factions, but people want is sort of like choice and feel like their actions have consequences or effects, and it's so you can either do a sort of more Skyrim style where so you can go and join the evil factions like the Dark Brotherhood, or you can go and do Thieves Guild or Mages Guild, and you sort of go to seek out that content and can complete it, or alternatively you can take a faction and then affect it, grow up the ranks and have an effect on its actual course. It's kind of like what's a good example actually? It's this isn't a fantastic example, but like, when you join the Legion, you can either let Caesar die and have Legate Lanius take over, or have Caesar, and that's a different outcome. Or it's the kind of same thing. It's like House and the independent sort of path of New Vegas are two sides of the same coin.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. And I do hope that the kind of cities too are full of role-playing opportunities as well, because, the Atlantis is the biggest, New Atlantis is the biggest city that Bethesda supposedly has ever made. And to me, it looks kind of dull. So I just hope that there's some really kind of cool stuff to do there. I know, like, I do like the look of Aquila. I think that's probably the most interesting city to me so far. Neon, I'm the biggest fan of the concept art, but so far I'm not convinced that it's going to be some like multi-layered, like really like cyberpunk feeling kind of city, like what the concept art indicates. I hope it doesn't just feel like Groundbreaker in the Outer Worlds. Like if it's really fleshed out as a city, then I'm going to be pretty
The
key.
lore about it was pretty cool. How there was like those they're fish on this planet that have like a sort of psychoactive substance that they make a kind of drug out of, like from that thing, like those kinds of things.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this is what excites me. Like I like that. I all of a sudden get a little bit more attached to Neon. That this is this planet, this is the city, and this is why it's successful. And there's this niche sort of fish thing with there's drugs, in it, versus sort of like, oh, here's a new rock and it's got palm trees and some dinosaurs on it, and it's just generated for you.
This is the thing. If there's, I think there's like 4 major cities, but if there's like 5 planets, even like let's just say 4 planets even that are amazing and together feel like a Skyrim tier map, because okay, this is a bit negative, but just hear me out. One of the things with Skyrim and with Elder Scrolls in general is that there's thousands of years of history. So as you travel across the map, it makes sense from a lore perspective to find things from all kinds of eras. Here's an ancient Nordic ruin, or here's an Aelid ruin, or here is a Dwarven ruin, and there's a whole story about, who the Dwemer are and where they're from, right? When you travel across a new planet, even in Starfield, like Jemison, like one of these Goldilocks planets that support life and seem really interesting, what is going to be the variety of the dungeons, caves, mines, like the kind of locations? Or if you look at, Fallout even has all these kind of like cool locations and things you can find. What's it going to be outside of like space stations, or
also,
here's when the New Frontier came and built this and now it's an abandoned outpost that used to mine something. You know what I mean? I just hope there's a variety of like cool caves. And I mean, we did see some cave looking stuff in some of the trailer gameplay footage.
Unless Bethesda is incredible and have like 100 times their sort of output or like work or whatever, right, with Starfield, I kind of feel like it's going to be the case. There is not going to be any one planet that is perfect and so big and handcrafted and stuff. There's going to be New Atlantis and good chunks of area around it and a few little extra like hub areas that are all done. And then the rest is kind of going to be procedural generated. And it's going to be that kind of system on quite a few planets. And then there's going to be planets that are much more bare than others. But I don't think it's going to be a sort of... It's not going to feel like Skyrim just walking from point A to point B and there's so much stuff in between it to do. Yeah, it's okay.
I just mean like if you told me like for sure it's the same amount of content that Skyrim has but just spread around on different planets, because it's just a different way of doing loading screens, right? Like it's just what I'm saying is, obviously I prefer a fantasy game where I take my horse across the map. What I'm saying is, if you get in a spaceship and fly, there's a little loading screen, then you're in space flying around, then a little loading screen as you come down into the atmosphere of a new planet. But if cumulatively, I assume there must be.
Dude,
I know that they're gonna try and do like less and make it seem more like fluid, but there's just gotta be. I'm sure.
Yeah, but the thing is that feeling's important. The part of the significant sort of feeling of walking from like Whiterun to Markarth and all of the things you see in between and all of the things you do has a different like actual mental thing versus going through 4 different loading screens to get to another city. It's the difference between fast traveling and walking. You know what I mean? Like fast traveling from Whiterun to Markarth isn't the same experience as walking there and all of the cool things you see in between.
Well, I suppose a game you could look at is like Outer Worlds. It's just a different game. You're not walking between planets, but it's fun when you fly into a new planet and get the view out the window of like, oh wow, the environment here is far different to anything I've been on before. There's a main city here. Looks like it's going to be full of characters.
But I guess the way that's built is it's all still like hub focused, but there's open hubs, but everything there is sort of handcrafted. There's not big like procedural masses of stuff in between.
For sure, but I guess you have to look at the scale, right? Like if you, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here. You've heard, go listen to our first video if you want to hear what we think. But I guess it depends on the size of the planet too. Like if you look at the space battles in the trailer, when you're kind of zooming towards the planet, it comes up to the screen quite quickly. So I don't think it's gonna be like, obviously, it's not going to be like literally planet Earth scale on every planet. It's going to feel like they're more like little rock balls with different biomes floating in space. And that's good because it means you can traverse them a bit quicker than, you know, taking... imagine if you just landed on a planet and it's just barren for like hours in one direction. That would not be fun.
By the way, good thing you brought it up too, but like space in general and the spaceship customization is something that I'm really positive on. It looked really comprehensive. There looked like a lot of stuff you can do. And when you're playing any space game, the ship that you're on is almost an extension of your own personality. Like in Knights of the Old Republic, it's the Ebon Hawk. In Mass Effect, it's the Normandy or the variations of it. Like there's that sort of attachment, and the idea that you can customize and sort of take an ownership over it, or like, you know, in Firefly, the ship, and like there's all of these sort of iconic spaceships, and the idea that you can kind of create your own that sort of reflects not just, you know, your, because usually you're only using like armor and clothing to reflect your sort of character, but now you've got a ship as well to sort of,
I think that's really cool.
yeah, so you could have like, maybe there is, and I wish it was Kalama, but like you could like the Star Wars Mandalorian series, like him and his ship, if you can have that same kind of character feel. And so this is the one thing I'm less going on, is the fact that it's like that NASA punky looking thing. It's just not my favorite aesthetic, but I personally am going to try and bend away from it as far as possible with cooler like.
You're gonna have to be a bad guy from what we've seen so far. It seems like they have all the coolest armors, you know. Come to the dark side. We've got cookies.
And so also talking about like other positive things for the role playing, in the skill trees, it does look like there is quite a fleshed out social tree. Like there was a whole like branch for that, which I'm happy about, because I quite like this. It's one of my favorite things. It's Fallout games. Like I like being the sort of silver tongue, talk your way through things, so on and
I think that will be a really fun way to do Starfield. And it's a disappointment that they showed us the most boring probably tree, right? Like, combat tree, and it's full of like kind of basic damage adds to different weapons and things like that. It's not particularly as exciting as some of the other ones, but that's okay. You know, we've got something to look forward to. Just going back to the spaceships real quickly, I did want to say that I also like the fact that you can board other ships. And if you look at the kind of options, I'm pretty sure one of them said get up, almost as if you could like go back into first person and kind of like walk up through that like kind of thing, or climb a ladder and actually see yourself board their ship instead of just spawn in there. I think that would be be a lot of fun. You wouldn't do it after the 50th time, but to begin with, I think it'd be pretty cool.
And the boarding, like you've got to have that as like, because you know, one of their whole factions is on the premise they're space pirates.
Exactly.
So there should be a lot of space piracy options, and I even like Radiant Systems or whatever to imagine it, like raiding. Like if we can, to be honest, if they nail that, like being a space pirate could be pretty.
Sounds
fun.
like the funnest thing. Like
yeah,
they're like, go to this planet. There's a guy, you need to like kidnap him, put him on your spaceship and take it back. I think that'd be cool.
I think like a good like summary of our thoughts, like obviously outside of the negative things and worries and concerns, I think there's lots of potential in terms of role playing for all of the systems that are there, and it's all a good step in the right direction for Bethesda. I just hope that the setting supports like interest. That means like whether the factions are good and multifaceted, and whether it's actually fun to be these kind of people, or whether I'm actually invested and interested in the world. Because when you're role playing a game, you have to be interested in the world, because it's
like one of the most important things.
Otherwise, it's hard to like grip it and get into it. But you know, who knows? Maybe we'll be able to make all kinds of like funky scientist characters with their big science labs on 5 different things or planets, or you've got like, I don't know, maybe you set up some sort of infrastructure kind of thing for farming on different places, and I don't know, becoming
there also seems to be there seems to be a focus on like picking your crew for your ship and your settlements, and it sounds like it's kind of like being hinted at that they're kind of more involved and important than in previous games. I mean, unless it is just a gimmick and they're like, what kitchen hand do you want on your ship?
I think they
what kind of looking person do you want pressing buttons? But it seems like they might actually help in different ways.
I think they too. I think that's one thing that they kind of tried with going from Skyrim to Fallout 4. They went, because you know, everyone got attached to characters like Serana and so on that are companions with a lot more like effort put into them, a lot more dialogue and so on. So in Fallout 4, they actually do a good job of like most of the companions, and they're all there and they've got a lot of stuff, and it's some of the people's favorite things about a lot of games. Like you play Mass Effect, like you're not talking about being Shepard, you're talking about like all of the companions and the romances and stuff like that. And I feel like but with Fallout 4, they also gave you dialogue, which kind of was a little bit of a step back. But now I feel like you have a really good if they do Fallout 4 style companions on top of you having like the role playing. So it could feel like a bit more like a New Vegas in the way that you have really good companions, but you also have full autonomy and control over who you are.
Oh, for sure. It could be. It could be. I suppose at the end of the day, like our biggest concern is like how they'll execute the features that seem to be there. And if they'll be, you know, as good as they can be, or if it'll be one of those situations where it's like, oh, none of this stuff actually matters at the end of the day, but it's kind of just, you know, there to click and be like, I clicked this and I got 10% more damage. As long as there's some actual like ways in which you can change the world around you, and you know all the stuff we talk about when we talk about what we want in Elder Scrolls 6, when we talk about choice and consequence, and the world existing without you but changing because of any significant actions you do. And the ability to twist characters even would be cool if you have companions and you can kind of, you know, you should be like a Crimson Fleet guy like me. And if they're more neutrally inclined, you can like shift them. But if they're like some real like Freestar Collective kind of character, they'll turn on you and you have to kill them. Like there's a lot that they could do that they didn't really show off. And look, I'll give them this as well. There's two things I want to say. The first is that despite going for a NASA kind of punk game and that kind of more realistic aesthetic, it's far from realistic, right? And they've done that for a reason. They're not just making a realistic, boring space sim. They're trying to make something a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a. But I think
you would hope,
like what you're saying there, like I wonder too if they take cues from Outer Worlds, because some of the cool things too is like with the Outer Worlds companions and stuff, even is the way that you could influence them somewhat and so on. And like that's the biggest, most important thing I think in any role-playing game. If people were sitting around and playing a game of tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, the appeal there is that you can be who you want and you can do things and have impact on the story and world and so on. Otherwise you'd watch a movie. If you didn't want impact, like as a medium, gaming allows player input. So you want to focus in on that part of player input. That's what makes it exciting and interesting and unique as its medium. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And the second thing, which I'm glad you jumped in because I actually completely forgot it. I was like, shh. was I went and I watched the Fallout New Vegas like E3 trailer, which I didn't watch at the time. Like when I got into New Vegas, you just told me about, hey man, like there's a new Fallout game. It's New Vegas, and I bought it and I played it. I never watched the trailer back then, right? You go and watch that, and this may be giving Starfield way too much credit, but we don't know yet. When you go and watch the New Vegas trailer and just pretend that you don't know the depth of what you're looking at, it kind of doesn't look that great. You see some buildings, you see yourself shooting like super mutants on Black Mountain. I'm not talking about the trailer that pops up when you start the game and you have the NCR Ranger. It's a different trailer.
But even the super mutants and stuff, like I feel like is more.
But if you didn't know the pre-existing lore, you'd be like, okay, big green monsters. Yeah,
but then there's guns. The music, and you see them in the camps, the cars. Of course. So like, I think I remember the trailer.
Just all I'm saying is, yes, it gets me more interested than the Starfield one, especially as someone who likes Fallout. Yeah. My point is, go and watch the E3 New Vegas trailer and really disconnect your mind from everything you know about the world and the lore and stuff, and just watch it. I'm not saying it's as interesting as Starfield. I don't have to say that, but I guess I can say easily, it doesn't do New Vegas justice. Like, New Vegas was such a better game with so much more in it, more factions, characters, and options than you possibly saw in that trailer.
Still, you'll get like, this is what I feel like a lot of the other places, the other worlds and settings and stuff, whether it's like Fallout or Bethesda or Elder Scrolls or whatnot, they have like an immediate like sort of personality to it. You know, all I'm going to say is I feel like generally the reason when people get excited about like these like big, cool, expansive, creative universes and stuff to play in, I think the reason we don't see a lot of NASA punk kind of ones is because it's not a particularly interesting kind of setting. Like I think they work great for like specific movies or small settings or things like that. But like,
look, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell because people like me even like love New Vegas so much. But I'm telling you, the trailer opens. You've got Edie going through a completely barren, empty desert for like,
but even that,
50 seconds straight. Even that, what? But we know how cool it is.
No. But even outside of that, if you're a stranger watching that, it's this random robot floating through the desert with number plates attached to it and so on, and then bang, it gets shot, and then all of a sudden it unleashes into the trailer, and it's like flicking through different things. There was no, dude. we didn't see enough of. We saw nowhere near as much Starfield as you see in that time, like in terms of just variety of NPCs and locations.
My point is
like
simply that it doesn't do the game justice, and trailers sometimes don't. That was my point.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a big lover of New Vegas. You know, if they remastered New Vegas, that would make me the happiest dude ever, because I'd get to play it again and I'd be able to make content about one of my favorite games and actually, you know, that be a feasible use of my time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so in summary, Starfield feelings still very mixed, but
we tried. And look, like there's a lot to give it credit for. There's a lot of things we went more in depth with this discussion that we didn't talk about in our initial one on 3 hours of sleep.
And it's like, guys, if you guys are actually genuinely like pumped as hell and you think this is the sickest looking setting, like, power to you. I am actually really glad for you, and I am excited for the potential of all the role playing things that are there. And procedural generation could be cool, but I'm just sitting there. Oh, we'll see if it's executed. I'm not going in thinking Starfield's going to great. Maybe I'll come out with a better point of view because I actually had lower expectations for it.
All it will take is one leak and you see that they've hidden intelligent alien species from us, and we'll be like, oh my god.
Yeah.
We'll see. But thank you everyone for tuning in. We do appreciate it. Let us know if you want any more Starfield discussions, what you want us to, talk about, what you want our thoughts on. Obviously, when Starfield comes out, we're going to be covering it a lot, so do subscribe for that. In general, if you have any Elder Scrolls topics you want us to talk about, let us know in the comments as well. Social media links are below, and we look forward to nerding out with you again next time.